This is video number 1 in a series about presbyopia, asking why is it that people need reading glasses and what other options are there?
In youth, for most people, reading is effortless. Print is nice and sharp. But sometime after age 40, print looks more like this. Brighter light helps for a while, but at some point, you need help with reading glasses. For most people, this is their first landmark of aging. There is an exception. For those with myopia, otherwise known as nearsightedness, it is functionally equal to having built-in reading glasses. But they don't totally escape. Their distance glasses neutralize the advantage, and then myopes become the same as everyone else. Because myopia is essentially universal, a lot of effort has gone into developing a variety of treatment approaches. Here is our plan for exploring presbyopia. Because there are a number of new developments, we are dividing this into 3 videos. This video, number 1, starts with an overview of the machinery that controls how the eye changes focus from distance to near. Then, what causes the loss of the ability to change focus, called presbyopia. The most common treatment options are standard glasses and contact lenses, like over-the-counter readers which are available just about everywhere. In video number 2, we start our exploration into new treatments, here using eye drops to help with presbyopia. In video number 3, we cover surgical options, for example, a form of LASIK, corneal implants, lens exchange, and scleral procedures, some of which are already in use. Here is our plan for this video. Part 1, background regarding the eye and how the focusing mechanism works in a young eye. In the sense that your eye works like a camera, light rays from a distant object come to a focus and form an image on the retina in the back of the eye. The ideal of sharp focus is called emmetropia and relates to distance vision. Refractive error, like myopia and hyperopia, is discussed in other videos. If this is the setup for distance vision, what happens when you want to see up close? As you bring an object closer to you, the image moves backwards, falling behind the retina out of focus. In order to keep the focus on the retina, you need to add focusing power. In the eye, the focusing muscles contract, which causes the lens to change shape, which adds the needed power. Let's look a little deeper into the structure of the eye. The cornea is the clear window in the front of the eye that lets light in. It is also the first part of the focusing system of the eye. The iris is the colored part. The hole in the center of the iris is the pupil. Right behind the iris is the lens, part 2 of the focusing system. The ciliary body contains the focusing muscles, which are attached to the lens by small fibers called zonules. Lining the inside of the eye is the retina, a layer of nerve tissue that acts like film in a camera. Underneath the retina is the choroid, a layer of blood vessels that supplies the retina. And lastly, the sclera is the tough outer layer of the eyeball that gives it its shape. For incoming light, the cornea and lens together supply the focusing power, 2/3 from the cornea and 1/3 from the lens. The important thing about the lens is it is flexible and thus can change its strength. That is the key in shifting from distance to near vision. The mechanism that controls the change of focus is simple on first viewing, but a little more complex in the details. The ciliary body is a ring of muscles surrounding the lens, which controls lens shape. The geometry is set up such that, in distance focus, the focusing muscles are in their relaxed state. Because the ciliary muscle is attached to the sclera, when it is relaxed, the zonules exert an outward pull on the lens, keeping its shape relatively flatter. When you want to see up close, the ciliary muscle contracts, so the zonules relax their pull on the lens. That allows the lens to assume its preferred rounder shape, which results in increased focusing power. That is the summary version of the classic consensus model. Let's run through that one more time in a little more detail. The lens is attached to the ring of focusing muscles, the ciliary body, by fibers called zonules. The ciliary body has 3 sets of muscles in different orientations: circular, longitudinal, and radial. For our purposes, it is sufficient to know they all contract as a unit. In the relaxed state, the lens is pulled into a relatively flatter shape. This is distance focus. When the focusing muscles contract, it allows the lens to become rounder. Why rounder? Because the lens is encased in an elastic capsule that wants to be round. Think of trying to flatten an inflated balloon. It wants to return to a spherical shape. The increased curvature of the lens results in increased focusing power. The lens also moves forward slightly. Lens dimensions have been measured in many studies: lens thickness along the visual axis and lens diameter at the equator. This study shows the changes in lens dimensions in young eyes before presbyopia. Lens measurements are taken at 3 levels of accommodation: 0, 4, and 8 diopters. You can see on top the lens diameter decreases, while on the bottom the lens thickness increases. That goes along with the changes we expected. Those shape changes go along with an increase in lens curvature. Increase in steepness of curvature is measured by decreased radius of curvature. The front surface shows a significant change while the back surface change is modest. Again, this agrees with our model. Further along, we will show how these measurements are affected by age. More things happen with close focus that we will consider in a minute. Besides the set of zonules that connects the ciliary body to the lens, there is a set that attaches to the front surface of the vitreous and another to the inside of the eye wall. The ciliary body is anchored at the scleral spur on one end and the choroid on the other. When the ciliary body contracts, it interacts with these other structures. For those who are interested, there is a computer-animated model that shows the interaction of the various parts. The animation can be accessed on YouTube. To be complete, the ability to read and see up close involves more than just a change in lens focus, which is one step of a 3-step process called accommodation. Part 1 is ciliary body contraction to change the lens shape, adding plus power. Part 2 is constriction of the pupils, resulting in an increase in depth of field. Part 3 is contraction of the middle external muscles of the eyes. This action turns the eyes inward, which maintains alignment on the near object. If the eyes remained parallel like they are at distance, each eye would be looking at a different object up close. Thus, accommodation for focus at near has 3 parts which are linked together. This whole mechanism works very well in youth, but nothing lasts forever. Part 2. How does presbyopia happen? This is the focusing power of the lens presented in traditional form, showing how it changes over your lifetime. When you are young, reading is easy because you have a lot of focusing power in reserve, about 14 diopters. But over time, that declines until, at some point, usually in the early 40s, it becomes noticeably more difficult to focus up close, and you need help with reading glasses, known as presbyopia. Then, sometime in the late 50s, that last diopter of accommodation is probably from pupil constriction and increased depth of field rather than from lens flexibility. As an additional note, the amount of accommodation depends on how you measure it. Without going into details, using, quote, objective measures yields a curve with a sinusoidal shape, in contrast to the more historic straight line acquired using, quote, subjective measures. The main difference being in early life from ages 3 to 30. This is from the 2008 Anderson study. Anderson's 2014 study shows a similar result. For our purposes, by either method, accommodation approaches the zero line, the last diopter of accommodation, in middle 40s. Why does presbyopia happen? Of the multiple structures and actions involved in accommodation, does the problem lie with the lens, the focusing muscles, or something else? The classic explanation for reduced accommodation is loss of flexibility of the natural lens. As the lens ages, it changes color from clear to yellow to orange to brown. On one hand, this is part of cataract development. For the purpose of this discussion, the lens also becomes harder. This goes along with our experience doing cataract surgery. In young eyes, the lens is soft like gelatin and can be gently vacuumed out. But as time goes by, it eventually approaches rock-like, requiring ultrasound to fragment it for removal. There is no doubt about the loss of flexibility. This is the most important change, but we will discuss a few others. Not only does the lens become stiffer, it also undergoes a change in shape. Consider, the lens is a living structure. Cell division happens at the peripheral equator, where new cells are continually added. Because the lens is enclosed in a capsule, the new cells cannot be shed like skin cells. Instead, they accumulate within the lens. Over time, the added cells cause the lens to increase in size. More specifically, it increases in thickness. But whether the lens changes in diameter is a subject of debate. Increased lens size results in increased curvature of the front and possibly back surfaces with age. Measurements show decreased radius, which equals steeper curvature, which should make the eye more nearsighted. However, that is not what is observed. Looking at refraction in adults, after age 40, it moves in the hyperopic direction. This little surprise is called the lens paradox. Continuing that thought for a moment, after age 70, refraction shifts back toward myopic change. This is thought to go along with cataract development, specifically nuclear sclerosis. With the lens surfaces becoming more curved, why the hyperopic shift? It turns out the increase in curvature is counterbalanced by a decrease in the refractive index of the lens. Here are the measurements. One more item about lens size. If the lens increased in the equatorial direction, that would shorten the distance between the lens and the ciliary body, with the result that the zonules would not be able to exert as much tension. This also affects the orientation of the zonules, which may lessen their ability to exert tension on the lens. We will return to this later. So far, we see loss of lens flexibility contributing to presbyopia. How about the focusing muscles? Are they losing strength? Researchers have studied this issue, measuring things such as muscle width, position, and contractility at different ages. These are the lens dimensions we looked at before. In our model, with accommodation, the ciliary muscle ring narrows, lens diameter decreases, and lens thickness increases. Now, how do these dimensions change with age? We start with an often referenced study by Strank in 1999 using lens measurements taken from MRI images. Since accommodation is controlled by the ciliary muscle, let's start there. This is the diameter of the ciliary muscle ring in the relaxed state. Interestingly, the ring diameter gradually decreases with age. One note, it would be good to have a larger sample over age 50. When the ciliary muscle contracts with accommodation, you can see the ring diameter decreases as expected, even with age. The arrows show the change in a few example subjects. Doing the subtraction shows the amount of change with accommodation decreases somewhat with age, but the important point is that the change does not go to zero. This is one piece of evidence that the ciliary muscle is still contracting. Regarding the lens, how does it change? First, lens diameter. Resting lens diameter does not change much with age. Maybe it decreases slightly. With accommodation, lens diameter decreases as expected. That is easier to see in plotting the amount of difference, which gradually declines with age. Before age 40, the average change in lens diameter is 0.56 millimeters. After age 40, that drops to 0.22 millimeters. Put another way, sometime around age 50, lens diameter no longer changes with accommodation. Last, lens thickness. Thickness gradually increases with age. We already talked about cells building up inside the lens. With accommodation, we see the increase in lens thickness as expected. This shows the change in lens thickness with accommodation, as it also declines with age. Before age 40, on average, lens thickens by 0.4 of a millimeter. After age 40, the average lens thickens by 0.17 millimeters. Put another way, the amount of thickening gradually declines until the mid-50s when the lens shows no change. All that shows that the ciliary muscle is still contracting years after the lens is no longer able to change shape. Moving forward in time, one more look at the ciliary body function with age. The arrival of OCT scanning provided higher image resolution and better measurements of everything inside the eye, in this case the ciliary body. In 2010, this group published measurements of the thickness of the ciliary muscle at 3 different locations in young people up to age 34. This is what they were measuring in the ciliary body, just in case the image orientation is confusing. Skipping ahead to a year later, they reported their data on a wider range of subjects up to age 79, aiming to see how the ciliary body response changed with age. We will show the result at a point 1/4 or 25% of the way from the front end, labeled CM25. The open circles represent ciliary muscle thickness in its resting state at this location for a range of ages. The filled circles represent muscle thickness with 8 diopters of accommodative stimulus. The arrows show example thickness change for a few individuals. This graph shows 2 things. First, the average thickness increases as the muscle contracts with accommodation, as expected. Second, the thickness measurements do not appear to change with time. In other words, the ciliary muscle is showing about the same amount of contractility at all ages, at least in this study. Best current thought is that the ciliary muscle maintains its strength of contraction well past the onset of presbyopia. The principal cause of presbyopia remains loss of flexibility of the lens. Consider also that this question affects the function of accommodative intraocular lenses, which depend on contraction of the ciliary muscle. There are other factors that play a role in presbyopia. The sclera and other structures become stiffer, affecting overall flexibility. Lens shape and zonule orientation may affect pull on the lens. We will cover these in more detail at the end of the video, and they will come up again in the video on surgical treatments. Because there are a variety of theories about the cause of presbyopia, that leads to multiple treatment approaches. Part 3. In order to plan treatment strategies, we need to think about what is happening in our visual world. Daily life does not happen at only one distance. Rather, we have 3 targets to plan for. First, objects at distance. Second, lots of things in life happen at arm's length, like reading sheet music or painting, or in our modern world, including computer screens. Third, reading and near work, as with the artist's father reading a newspaper. Before we move on, what is unique here? This gentleman appears to have reached the age of presbyopia, but he is reading without glasses. Is it artist's discretion? Is he nearsighted? Or is he just reading the large print? These paintings illustrate the range of vision the young emmetrope can handle with their wide range of accommodation. With presbyopia comes the question of how are we going to address all three distances? The simplest and least invasive method for treating presbyopia is correction with glasses or contact lenses. Glasses options come in two categories, single vision and multifocal, depending on what your needs are. A single vision distance lens works for a young person who only needs distance correction, either for near or farsightedness. For a presbyope, this is useful for the times they don't want a multifocal, say while playing sports like golf or tennis. For reading, if you're a presbyope, you could have a single vision reading glass, and if you only have a small distance prescription, then over-the-counter readers are a handy option. But there are caveats. First, reading glasses are only good for up close. You have to take them off to see distance. Second, if you have a significant distance prescription, they work less well. Prescription readers include correction for the distance correction. For most presbyopes, the convenience of being able to leave glasses on leads to multifocal lenses, distance vision through the top of the lens and reading through the bottom. Traditional bifocals have a smallish half-moon reading segment that could be extended across the bottom half of the lens, but that's less common now. Both of these leave out intermediate distance, which could be covered by a trifocal, not shown here. Most people, for a long time now, have gone with progressive lenses. In these lenses, the power increases gradually as your eye travels down the lens, so you can be in focus at any distance, including intermediate. So this does a good job of addressing the range of visual needs. Just like glasses options, there are multiple contact lens choices, starting with single vision soft and hard lenses. For presbyopia, there are multifocal lenses. Interestingly, there is also a bifocal contact lens with either a flat lower edge that rides on the lower eyelid or a weighted lower edge to keep it oriented, but they haven't been that popular. Alternatively, one can go to a monovision strategy. Monovision is the term for having a different correction in each eye. With contacts, it would be single vision lenses, usually fitting the dominant eye for distance and the non-dominant eye for reading. Yes, a different focus for each eye. Surprisingly, people seem to adapt to this difference fairly well. It does not address intermediate range, and there is some reduction in stereo vision. This can also be done with refractive surgery like LASIK in one eye, or choosing lens implants. That would be the range of glasses options that do a good job and are readily available. Part 4. Adjustable focus glasses. We're not quite done with glasses. There are specialty items. In particular, we will mention adjustable focus glasses. On the left is a pair of glasses where focus is adjustable manually. On the right is a pair with newer tech autofocus glasses. Starting with this simple tech example, it was developed years ago by an Oxford physics professor, Joshua Silver, in an effort to provide glasses correction in countries where resources were limited. It is based on a simple concept, adjusting the fluid volume in the space between two flexible, clear membranes, creating a version of a lens. Fluid is stored in the syringe attached to the temple on the glasses, connected by a tube to the space between the membranes. Adding fluid makes the lens convex. Subtracting fluid makes it concave, so it can correct for farsightedness, nearsightedness, or presbyopia. It does not correct for astigmatism. Once the lens focus is manually dialed in by the user, the connecting tube is sealed off and the external syringe is removed, leaving the focus set at one distance, but better than no focus. Which leads to, how useful is such a device? It turns out there is a lot of uncorrected presbyopia, as seen in this world map by Frick. Digesting that, in 2008, Holden estimated that by 2020, in, quote, more developed countries, the percentage of people with presbyopia who are uncorrected would remain small, whereas in, quote, less developed countries, about 2/3 of presbyopes are uncorrected, and in least developed countries, an even higher percentage. More recently, Bourne showed the same trend of increasing uncorrected presbyopia worldwide. This does not even include uncorrected near and farsightedness. Here is more background for those who are interested in public health. Which brings us back to Silver's self-adjustable glasses. He had hoped to get the production cost low enough that they would be widely distributed in areas that otherwise did not have optical resources. I don't know that they have distributed as many as they had hoped to. This is their organization and website if you are interested. There are other strategies for simple self-adjustable glasses. For one example, this system has two lens parts designed such that as they slide across one another, the power of the lens changes. As of this writing, they are available on Amazon for about $95. There are more options of different makers and styles. In addition to simple manual adjustment lenses, there are several entries into auto-focusing glasses, meaning the glasses sense what you are looking at and adjust their focus accordingly. This one is from the University of Utah. This variable focus lens is also based on pressurizing fluid within an enclosed space to create a functional lens. In this case, a see-through piston on the back side and a flexible membrane on the front. On the right is the pair of glasses. It has a distance sensor in the center, processing circuitry in the frame, which signals to the piston, which changes the shape of the front surface of the lens. We note that it has an organized clinical trial, but no results are yet posted. Other versions of autofocusing glasses are in development. These would be prototype versions, on the left from Stanford University, on the right from the University of Murcia in Spain. Proving technology can do a lot, but can they develop this into a product that competes with the functionality, durability, and relatively low cost of current multifocal lenses? That brings us to the end of the main part of Video 1 on the mechanism of presbyopia and the standard treatment with glasses or contact lenses. For those who are interested, we now venture into alternative theories of accommodation and presbyopia. The first proposal we view as an extension of the standard theory. It recognizes that with age, other structures in addition to the lens lose flexibility, the sclera, choroid, ciliary body, zonules, which restricts the movements normally involved in accommodation. This theory is called visiodynamics. It is not related to the Shakar theory we'll talk about next. Proponents of this theory have developed a particular surgical approach based on creating micropores in the sclera overlying the ciliary muscle in an attempt to restore useful tissue flexibility. This surgery, laser ACE, is covered in Video 3. The surgery is aimed at the early phase of presbyopia while the lens still has some flexibility. Its results would ultimately be limited by the loss of lens flexibility. So far, we have been discussing the dominant theory of accommodation, ciliary muscle contraction causing overall rounder lens shape, with presbyopia coming mainly from loss of flexibility of the lens. Here is an entirely different theory. For accommodation, Shakar proposes that ciliary body contraction pulls on the zonules at the equator while relaxing the front and back zonules. The localized pull on the peripheral lens causes the center of the lens to increase in curvature while the edges flatten. Note, this does not fit the measurements we discussed earlier. Proponents of this theory believe those measurements are inaccurate. For presbyopia, Shakar believes loss of lens flexibility is not the controlling factor. Rather, his proposal is that the lens grows in diameter so that there is less space between the ciliary body and the lens. Thus, the zonules are not able to exert enough tension on the lens. This has led to various surgical procedures attempting to expand the sclera and reestablish zonule tension. This is one recent example, inserting implants into the sclera to try and expand the ciliary ring. We discussed this further in the surgery video, noting here that it did not receive FDA approval. If you wish to read further, these are several venerable references from this debate. One last theory, this one of historic interest. This is based on the vitreous, proposing that it supports the lens like a trampoline. This diagram from Coleman shows the concept of the lens suspended or cradled by the vitreous face. He proposed that in accommodation, the anterior vitreous sags, causing the lens to take a rounder shape. This theory has fallen by the wayside, as accommodation still works after removal of the vitreous. There are other theories that we will not go into here. With that, we come to the end of video number 1, describing the mechanism of presbyopia and standard glasses options. In the accompanying videos, we talk about pharmacologic or eye drop treatment and surgical options. Regarding drops, one strategy involves constricting the pupil to increase depth of field. One such drop has just been approved by the FDA. Another strategy involves a medication to restore some flexibility to the lens. This is in early trial stages. Regarding surgery, there are a variety of strategies. For example, there are several versions of LASIK for presbyopia. There are implants or inlays that can be placed in the cornea. There is refractive lens exchange. That means removing the natural lens and replacing it with an artificial lens implant. Essentially the same as doing cataract surgery, except removing a clear lens. And there are surgeries that modify the sclera in different ways. We are now entering a new era of various treatment options, from drops to surgery. Will they work well enough, at low enough risk, and be affordable, sufficient to displace our familiar choices? Time will tell.